Hello, everyone. I'm Stephanie Boozer with CGC HQ. For those of you who just celebrated a long weekend, welcome back and thanks for joining us today. We're glad to have you. Before we jump in, just always like to make you aware of some events that we have coming up. So we've got several meetings this week. We've got tomorrow, we've got Bay Area. Columbia and Charleston, South Carolina, and Northern Indiana. Also, this week we have LA and San Diego and Texas will be meeting. And then you can see on the calendar, we've got a lot more coming up. Couple of other virtual events that we have. Next week is our Northeast XL. That is a full afternoon of really awesome content, so definitely check that out. And then we've got our Women in Tech Spring virtual event. This is going to be a midday event. It's a couple of sessions. One is Esther Bartel and Jacqueline Sanchez. They're going to be talking about really common women in tech issues in the workplace. We also have a conversation with Fran Hauser. She's an author of the book is called The Myth of the Nice Girl. So definitely check that out. And then of course, next after that is our Ask Me Anything webinar with Nutanix and Login VSI. You can ask them anything and they have to answer the questions. So check out those events. But today I know you are here to learn about Ansible and talking about what that can help you do. So we're going to jump in. First of all, just want to remind you, we are recording this session. You will get a link to the recording. It's going to come to you in an email from GoToWebinar. You'll get that tomorrow, so be on the lookout for that. Please type your questions in as you have them. We'll take as many as we can and stick around to the end because we have trivia because we have 3 pairs of Citrix branded Apple AirPods to give away. So stay tuned. All right, so without further ado, I'm about to hand things over to Pat Patterson with Citrix. He is the Director of Developer Evangelism. And Joe Shonk, he is a CTP and an independent consultant. Welcome, Pat and Joe. I'm going to, oh, and Joe's cat, I think. Is that what I hear? No?
Yep. Oh,
Yep.
there she is.
Oh, there she is. Yep.
Aw.
Usually Joe is joined by his cat, so I'm really glad that she made an appearance today. All right, Joe, I'm gonna send the screen to you, and Pat, I think you have some stuff you want to get
Yeah,
us started with.
yeah. So, Joe, why don't you introduce well, I mean, do you need any introduction? Why don't you briefly introduce yourself to the audience, and then I'll do the same and do my little bit of housekeeping, and then we can crack on.
Alrighty. Hello, everyone. I am Joe Shonk. I am a consultant. I primarily do Citrix-based consulting with another partner in crime, Steve Greenberg with Thin Client Computing. So a lot of you know me from that. I've been a CTP for the last 10, 11 years now. So I've kind of been known in those channels as well. And so today's presentation, we're going to pretty much start covering Ansible. We did 2 sessions a little bit earlier this year. If you want to go check those out, one of those was kind of like a high-level introduction of getting people to understand like a CI/CD pipelining and how we could use some of these DevOps tools to build VDAs. We did that with Mr. Greenberg, and then we also did another panel was it early in April with a few other CTPs talking about automation and included a couple of those Ansible bits and pieces. And today, what I would like to do is kind of extend that out and maybe get a little bit more into the weeds, and we can have a discussion. And I've got some demos I can show this time around. So I think the demos might help a few people kind of understand what is it Ansible is doing and how we're doing it, and maybe even give some people ideas of how they could take some of that and extend it. And if we have some time, we can kind of go in and see like how is the Ansible stuff structured and how is it set up. I've had a few questions since the other presentations. A few people kind of struggling, how do I get this all set up? But we can kind of give an overlay of how some of the stuff might how I have it structured, right? And so how I use it, and maybe that's something you can see if there's something missing in your particular code that you can pick up.
All right. Thanks, Joe. Well, I'm Pat Patterson. I have the grandiose title of Director of Developer Evangelism. And that basically means I do these kind of webinars and write articles and blog and tweet. And I basically just have fun with technology. And for some reason, Citrix keeps paying my salary. So yeah, I'm basically the MC here. Joe is very much the expert. I'm learning as much as all of you are, and so I'll be basically your proxy in asking questions. So feel free to type questions into the question panel throughout the session. Some of them I'll likely keep to the end if they're not kind of pertinent to what we're doing at the time, but I'll try and ask as many as we go along, just so that we can clarify any points as they arise. And before we get started properly, I'd like to run our usual couple of polls, because we always want to know more about the people that we're talking to. So Stephanie, there we go. So just like to know your role. I'm not going to read out the choices, but feel free to click other and specify. I know we have people like site reliability engineers in the mix, and I guess independent consultant like Joe would fall in that other category. So it's just good to know who we're talking to here. Okay, I see the numbers coming in. All right. So let's look. Okay, so it looks like the bulk of folks are architects, administrators, a few cloud ops, smattering of developers, and we'll look at the chat archive afterwards to see who you others are. And then the second question I'd like to ask is, what kind of company do you work for? And again, these choices are pretty self-explanatory. There might be others. Sometimes they pop up, but I try and capture the main options in the first four, and we always have a few Citrites, so I'll say welcome to you folks, and here we go. I'm all branded up this morning. Tea always tastes better from a Citrix mug. So what do we have here? Okay, so this is the usual pattern that we see. About 2/3 or so customers, about a quarter partners, and a few Citrites, and yeah, we'll sort through those others in the chat. Okay, so if we can go back to, there we go. All right, Joe, so tell us all about Ansible. What are we dealing with here?
We've got a couple demos set up for today. I don't know, are you able to see my screen? You should see the old-fashioned Edison lights. Okay, yep. Well, all right, so I'm not going to do the slides right this minute, but we'll get to the slides. We're going to do things in a little bit of an unusual order, kind of take that windy cruise through the countryside to get to point A to point B. So kind of what I've got set up, I've set this up in the lab at home. I've got an ESX server running vSphere, got Active Directory, got a file services, which I'm using for a file repository. I've set up PVS, a test server is a 2019 test server, a shell VM that I can use to actually boot up a PVS target. And that's, well, I shouldn't say NetScaler, Citrix ADC, VPX instance, and a couple web servers. Because we're going to start off with kind of Ansible 101. You know how in normal programming language we say 10 printf hello world and then run that application. You know, in this kind of world, it's kind of the same thing as, you know, building some web pages and load balancing them is kind of the hello world version of this. So we're going to start off with a simple, couple simple demos with the web. I've often in this Windows space here, I've got an Ubuntu instance running that has Ansible installed. So this is where our kind of control plane for Ansible is going to be in this terminal session. And then I've got the remote desktop manager. We can RDP and take a look at some of the virtual machines and some of the changes that have been made to these virtual machines, kind of before and after snapshot. And then I have Atom, which is a kind of a developer IDE text editor. It's free. It's from GitHub. It's got a lot of plugins, a lot of different things you can do with it. So a lot of people use like the Visual Studio editor and stuff like that. This is kind of another version of that. And it does markup and color coding and a bunch of other stuff. So we'll be using these different windows throughout. And so kind of start off with the web demo. It's got 3 web servers. And if we go ahead and log into this web server, this is just a basic Windows installation. It's got an IP address. It's put it up on the domain. So it's domain joined. But it doesn't have any roles or any configuration set up on it. And if we could go ahead and kind of take a look at, AppWiz, we can see there's nothing really installed other than the VM tools and some middleware components. We look up at Explorer. We look at the C drive. We don't even have an iNet pub directory yet that's defined. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and just kind of scroll down. A lot of these files that you see here, these YAML-based files, are kind of the script or the what you want Ansible to do. They're called playbooks, and these playbooks basically are a set of instructions that you can send to different hosts. And in this case, we're going to be running this particular install web server's playbook against those 3 Ansible servers. And so let's just kind of take a look at this playbook in a little bit of detail here. So we're going to call an Ansible module called, we're going to direct our job towards a bunch of hosts that we've defined in our host file as web servers. And keep that hosting on the side here for a second, because we'll come back to that. And these are the tasks that we're going to do with it. We're going to go ahead and we're going to install a Windows feature called Web Server. Right? Very simple. When we're going to say that instance is present. So in some ways, Ansible is not only for a procedural platform, but it's also can be declarative, right? And we'll discuss procedural and declarative a little bit later. But in this day, we're kind of just saying, hey, we want this web server to be present on the host that you're going to run this playbook against. And then what we're going to do to kind of lively up the demo a little bit is we're going to take some files that I have stored, and we're going to copy those files to the web server once we've done the installation. And then we're going to be able to show that we have a web page that's been set up on that web server. So
it's quite striking here, Joe. It's quite interesting here that there's no specifics in that file that you were just looking at in that web server install web servers file. That's a very generic file that has kind of the bones of what you want to do, and then I guess the specific web servers and the default site and so on are specified elsewhere. So you could use this again and again in different situations.
Correct. And so I'm going to run through the demo, and then I'm going to show you how I made each of those web servers a little bit unique. So in this case, we'll just go ahead and let's just get started. I do have a little cheat sheet, right? So I don't have to try to memorize all this stuff while doing the presentation and typing it out. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to run an Ansible playbook with that Ansible web server file that we just saw. There's a few other things we can get to why I add these to my command lines. They're not required, but they help me when doing integration with other customers and other people that would be also using this framework. So we're going to come over to our Ansible. I hope this is large enough. I tried to scale this window up a little bit so it's a little bit more readable, right? Yep. And so I'm going to ask for my vault password because I have everything encrypted when it comes to credentials. So we can store credentials into a YAML file, but we can also encrypt that YAML file so that somebody casually browsing around cannot see. They have to have a way to decode that YAML file in order to get access to some of the more sensitive data. I usually put some of the passwords that we're using for the automation account, maybe some mails for certificates, certificate import passwords, those kind of things get stored into a vaulted file.
So it's almost like the server-side equivalent of the password manager, like that you might use with your browser.
Right. So this is going to take so far it's connected to those 3 web servers that we have defined, right? Web 1, Web 2, and Web 3. So it's in the process of performing the full installation of IIS. And while that's happening, this kind of show you how I made some of the stuff unique. So Ansible is, again, it's just like an executable that you can run, but you kind of have to build a file structure. And you can kind of see up here that there's a couple different, some of these that you created yourself, and most of these you create yourself. So in the files, I've created a files folder, and I put a red, green, blue website in each one of those. But then it's like I'm running this installation against all 3 servers at the same time. So how does it know that this one should be the red server, this one's going to be the green server, this one should be the blue server? Well, we have a host bar directory that we can actually define different variables and configuration sets inside of a host bar. So when Ansible runs the playbook, it's reading in this host file, this YAML for each individual host. And so I can override, or even to set the variable that I want web server 1 to be green, I want web server 2 to be blue, and I want web server 3 to be red. And so it's going to do, if we go back and take a look at our Ansible playbook, we can see we have this kind of mustache, Jenga style variable, right? So now we can do some I can't even say the word. We can variabilize our task list and stuff like that.
Right.
And I've used this extensively in creating roles and stuff, so I can take a bunch of defaults that I want, and then people can just go into the host or group bars, and they can override the defaults that I've set and with their own defaults, right? And then that way you can kind of keep the code lean and slim and lightweight. So I don't have to create, if this was web server 1, then I want you to copy green over to the site. And then if this was web server 2, I could do that in here. I could do a when. I could do when statements in here, which is like an if statement. So I want to simplify the flow, and I want to simplify this a little bit.
So a question from Esther, whose name you might recognize. Can you also show the inventory file that determines which servers are defined as web servers, so we understand how it runs the playbook against a subset of servers?
Yes, I can. I'll do that right in a second. I'll just switch back to the Ansible script here, and then it finished installing, and then it finished copying the files. And so let's answer Esther's question real quick, and we'll come back to that. So there's a host file, if I can find my host file here. It's host files, roles, host file.
There it is.
So in my host file, I have a group called web servers. And in there, I've defined web server 1, Web Server 2, and Web Server 3 that all are kind of grouped together as that one entity, that one group, basically. And then so when I'm running this install web server, what are you? This one here, right? I'm using, these are the hosts. So that's the host group I'm using is web servers. And that's the same group that I'm referencing here, right? So this is what I define, and then these are the hosts that are associated to it. So, you know, you can create multiple groups. You could say create them by data center and then by type, like a delivery group or license servers or storefronts or your different types of VDAs or PVS servers or even different web servers. Doesn't even have, Ansible doesn't have to be used for Citrix related stuff. We just like to use it for Citrix related stuff. But so
okay. Cool.
That,
and we do have a couple more. Yeah, absolutely. And we, it's great to see the questions come in. We've got some more generic ones around Ansible, and I'll keep those to the end. So, but keep the questions coming in. Don't be worried if we don't answer them immediately. We'll get to them. Oh, okay, another quick question about those hosts. So Justin asks, can you build hosts dynamically? For example, if I wanted to get all servers on our domain to start collecting facts on, rather than trying to maintain and update that host file?
Well, there's a way. I mean, you could have a Ansible script that goes queries what you want and helps modify your host file.
Right, you could build it dynamic. Yeah, so I guess you're loosely coupled around that host file in that you can have any process you like create the host file and then operate. Ansible would just run against it.
Yeah, it's not stateful. It's like it's going to remember what it's not storing that host file in the memory. So when I run the next playbook, it's got to read it back in from the disk. So it's not going to try to pull it from memory. Now, kind of coming back to the web servers, we can see that I just refreshed the server. We see the IS was installed. And then we also have a new inet pub directory, which has web pages in here. And so if I scroll back over, I could go to 192.168.244.41, and 41 being the typo. 41 being web server 1. We have a green. To go to 42, we should have blue. If we go to 43, we should have a red version of these web pages. So the first part of our Ansible demo for this was, you know, we were able to install the IIS web service, and we were able to copy over a static website over to it. Now we want to maybe take this to the next level. And so what I've done with this particular demo is I did a little bit of integration with an ADC. If we come over to a Citrix Nest ADC, I know everybody says Netscaler still, so forgive me if I do that. I've set up an ADC. Right now, we don't have any load balancer vService created. We don't have any service groups. We don't even have any servers defined yet. So I'm going to let Ansible take care of that for me. And so I'm going to switch back over to our Ansible add-on. I'll kind of show you what the two playbooks I'm going to run. There's going to be, actually there's only one for this one. I'm going to configure ADC for the web servers. And we're going to run it a couple times because I want to show you what we can do with Ansible, not only after we've created the initial vServers and servers and service group, but how we can manipulate those once we're done with that. So let's configure ADC web servers. So this is the playbook that I'm using for this one. It's a little bit longer, and this is more just simply how the Citrix modules Citrix has a set of modules for Ansible for the Nitro SDK for the Citrix ADC. So a lot of this was taken from that. So what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create some servers. So we want to create web server 1, 2, and 3, and I can use one task. I can do it 3 times and do one for each, but in this case, it's just simpler. I can just define kind of a loop. So with items, it's kind of a for loop, like for each item in or something like that. So basically, we're going to loop through, and we're going to create the web server, or we're going to take the web server and add them to the ADC as an entry, and we're going to do that for each of those. Once we've done that, we're going to go ahead.
So you got that's basically like a table. It's just going to work through that associates that basically directs it to step through.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the next thing we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a service group and add those 3 servers into our server group. And finally, we're going to go ahead and take that server group and we're going to add it to create a V server and add that service group in there. Do a little persistence. This particular demo requires some persistency. Otherwise, you're getting one TSS that's for blue, but then all the text is meant for the red website, right? Because if you don't have any persistency, it's just going to round robin through all of them. And if you need persistency, you need to define the persistency. So let's go ahead and let's grab this playbook. And let's go ahead and let's just run this playbook.
Awesome. And while that's running,
this shouldn't take very long. This one's actually not having to install anything, right? So we can see that it's going ahead and adding the servers.
Right.
Now it's creating a service group. Now it created a server.
Wow.
So if we switch back to servers and refresh, we can see we have 3 servers that are defined in here. We have our service group that has our 3 service members in it. And then finally, we have a virtual server that has a service group in here. So now we go to this address, right? It's like we were doing this here. We go to this address, 60, the load balancer VIP, and go there. We can see that we went through the NetScaler. Now, if I refresh, I'm going to get the same page over and over. I'm not going to round robin through those because we have persistency set up, right? So maybe I want to test. Like, well, I know blue is number 2, right? So I got to number 2. It's like, okay, if we come back to our configure ADC, the first from the server level, we said disable false, so kind of a double negative in this case. So we don't want that server to be disabled, but we can come in here and we can say, hey, I want to disable number 2, and I want to disable number 3 because I want to focus on one server and test that one server out through the load balancer. I can come through here, rerun the script, and what it's going to do is it's going to go ahead and change those. Now, even though it didn't change these, it's still going to say okay on these, just simply because that's apparently that's a limitation of the Nitro SDK for Python. So the Ansible is not able to tell if something was changed or modified correctly. So sometimes they'll just show okay. When you usually see okay, it just kind of means it did need to make a change. But in this case, it did make a change. To come back and refresh, you gotta.
Some browser caching.
Yeah, you have to hit shift to otherwise it does cache that TSS. So we gotta flush that out. So now we got the green one. If I try to refresh and refresh and refresh, it's not going to give me that. Right. And if we come in the server, we can see that the 2 are disabled and 1 is enabled. And we can do that multiple times.
And we're kind of hitting on this idea of desired state here, right? This file describes the state we want the system to be in, and Ansible kind of figures out what it needs to do. So even though that create service group is there, Ansible knows it already exists and nothing's changed there, and it's only doing those server enable and disable, right?
Correct. So Ansible is considered kind of a hybrid because it's procedural, but it also can be declarative as well. And sometimes you might not be able to do something that's declarative, but now you can take advantage of its procedural nature and, you know, work around some of the things that maybe aren't declarative, right? Or don't have anything defined or a module. Sometimes you can take advantage of other modules from other frameworks or other systems that may not have a native module built for Ansible. So if we come back here, we'll do one last, right. So we set it to red, and now we have red.
Nice.
And so it'll stay red, you know, until that 10 minutes of inactivity expires, because that's what I have the persistency set for. And that kind of concludes this part of the demo.
Okay. So a couple of questions. Yeah, a couple of questions come up on this section. So one of them is, how are the credentials stored and what are the connection methods to the target hosts? And this actually applies to both the setting up those web servers and this these ADC operations, I guess. You know, what's going across the wire here, and how is it kept secure?
That is a very good question, and let's get this next demo started because it's going to take a little bit of time for it to complete, and we'll have plenty of time to answer the questions. So the next demo we're going to do is building the VDA and then booting it up and see if it works. So this test box is a Windows 2019 box, and if I go add remove programs, we can see that the basic VMware tools that are installed, no VDA, nothing too exciting there. So what I'm going to do is let's just get this kicked off, and I call this one the install master image, and yeah, right page. This is going to go ahead and get that started, and let's kind of give you a quick preview of what that looks like. Install master image. What this is going to do is going to target the master image, which I currently have set to test in our host file, and it's going to do some of the roles I created for to make things simpler, to actually do the installations with a set of defaults that I've defined that you can use the host file or a group file or the all.yaml file to override and point things to your file server, to using your particular environment, what versions of applications. Like I wanted to do the newest version of WEM, so I set a variable that will tell the role that I want this version of that role to be installed. Now we are going to skip Windows Update because that takes forever, and we don't necessarily have the time to do that today. So this one's going to install, it's going to secure our WinRM, which we'll get to in a second. Our power plan, I like to set to high performance. Most places we uninstall Windows Defender. We go ahead and install the .NET 4.8 framework, which is kind of needed for the newer versions of the VDAs and the different things. And then we're just going to install the VDA, the session recording, the WIM agent, PVS, and the PVS target device agent on there as well. But to get back to your original question on passwords and stuff. So this isn't really a standard Ansible thing. It's something I've kind of come up with to help with multi-user management. I created a password bars directory. And if you take a look at my password list, this is kind of what it looks like, right? We're talking about the Ansible Vault a little bit earlier. And what I'm doing is I'm encrypting this file. So when I run the playbook, you'll see there's an Ask Ansible Vault switch on here. And that Ansible Vault switch is saying you need to grab the password so it can decrypt this file in order to use the variables installed in there. in that particular folder. Now, this is a template that I use, right? So it doesn't have any real passwords in here. But this is kind of some of the things that you will set up is your Ansible username, Ansible password. If you're running against Windows, you're going to usually use a run as for privilege elevation. Your become user. So not only just have a regular Ansible user and password, which these two are more used for connecting to an SMB share. These two are more for elevated privileges. Right now they're the same account. That's why you see this Ansible password really is just a copy of that. This is the QDN name of your account, because we are using Kerberos, and then this is more your typical NetBIOS version of your account name. And then in here I added recently for the demo the Nitro user and Nitro password for the Citrix ADC. And then when we do certificate imports, what is the certificate name? And this is set up in a hash table so you can have many different certificates. So if you have one for each server, we can create a hash table, and then those can be defined in your host file as to which instance you want your certificate to pull, and then the roles know which certificate it needs to be using, what the password is, and even a thumbprint in some cases, like the delivery controller wants you to reference the certificate you're binding using the certificate thumbprint.
Right.
So that's what the password file looks like. Now, from securing things, right? Let me jump to this presentation bit, because that's going to cover it a little bit. Go ahead. So provisioning of the OS. So I'm provisioning your OSs with HashiCorp Packer. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with it. If you use Terraform, it's very similar. Same company that makes Terraform makes Packer. You using just a standard ISO and a customized auto attend XML file for the specific OS, whether it's Windows 10 or Windows 2019, even 2016, if you really want to go that route. In that auto unattend file, I don't know why they call it that, was the basic configuration is going to be configuring partitions. And I'll have one file for most roles, and then some things that require a second disk, maybe for PBS disks or something like that. We'll have an actual second disk, and it'll create the partitions for that. We're also setting what OS are we using. Are we using standard? Are we using data center? Is it going to be a core installation? Is it going to be desktop experience installation? Along with that comes with the KMS key, the public KMS key, not your private one, but the one, the VLA, the standard VLA key for the specific OS edition that you're using. We'll set in the local admin account, and then we're also sending some auto logins to allow, when a script reboots, it can auto log in, and it starts the next script, reboots, and stuff like that. And so some of the scripts that we're using, so these are the basic things we're doing. We're installing the VMware tool so we can have access to the networks. We're doing VMX-Net 3. We have to have VM tools installed. We're setting a static IP address, and in this case, I'm setting static IP addresses because I have a whole configuration set for Packer and how the computer names and IP addresses. Or you could just leave it DHCP. We change the computer name and then join the domain. A couple extra things I do, because I like to be a little bit more security conscious, is I create a self-signed certificate if I'm in a location that doesn't have a PKI infrastructure I can enroll with, or a kind of a wildcard certificate that they would use for the infrastructure bits. I can automate all three of those if needed, but default to the self-signed certificate of lack of anything else. And then we do an initial configuration of WinRM. Unfortunately, Packer doesn't have a very tightly secure implementation of the WinRM. He's doing basic, not even doing encryption, he's doing basic over the basic ports. But once I get into running Ansible, I lock it down. So instead of just doing basic authentication over an unencrypted port, which we initially get configured with Packet, so at least we can get Packet to finish its job. And once we turn that over to Ansible, and let's go to our master install images. The first thing I do is I'm going to secure WinRM. And so basically, I'm turning off the basic authentication, setting it to Kerberos only, and then HTTP. I'm removing the HTTP listener, and so only the HTTPS listener is still there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah. Sorry, I answered one question online already, in that you can keep secrets in other places apart from the Ansible Vault. So if you're using like a more kind of enterprise solution already, like CyberArk or HashiCorp Vault, Ansible has integrations there, and I posted a couple of links into the chat.
Yeah.
So how are we doing here? We have about I'd say about 10 questions to answer at the end, so we've got a few minutes to run through a bit more demo.
Yeah, so we can see here it's gone through quite a bit already. It's already installed the Citrix VDA. It's rebooting. Now it's installing the MSMQ feature, which is required for session recording. Maybe I kind of wanted to have a little bit of substance in this demo. Like we could have shut it a little bit short, but we can answer a couple more questions.
Yeah. So what's striking here, Joe, is so not only, I mean, obviously this is saving time, right? Because you figure this stuff out once and then you can run it 100 times, but you're getting a level of consistency and auditability here where you can be pretty sure of the initial state of the system, and then you've got this artifact, you've got this configuration you can put into change control, and can you then later, I mean, what happens, this is one of the questions, what happens if somebody changes config manually? Does that break the ability to use Ansible, or can you use Ansible to detect that and maybe rectify it?
So Ansible, while it can do a lot of declarative stuff, it isn't forcing a particular state continuously like some other platforms might. Think of Ansible more of a configuration manager. So if you did make some changes manually, they will stick unless you run a playbook that is going to have a state declared for that particular registry key or that file or something of that sort, where it says, hey, wait a minute, this file is different. Well, let me copy I'm told this file needs to be present here, so let me copy that file back over. So when you run it again, if you have something that's conflicting, it will put it in the state that you've declared it in the playbook. But think of it more of a configuration manager where it's not going to force every decision in the environment to be declared. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. And is there like a dry run or something you can do where it would show you what it would do, and then you could kind of see any deviations from the state that you've got described there?
That's actually a pretty good question. I don't have an answer for that one. So
okay.
So I know that I understand exactly what you're asking for, but I haven't really hadn't thought about that. So you want to kind of say to your previous point where you were saying that now you have a repeatable process, and it's so true. It's like when I go to a lot of places and they want to rebuild their VDA or move from one version to another OS version for the VDA, they don't know how some of the stuff was built. Even though they might have built most of it themselves, they don't know where all the registry keys are. And, oh, yeah, we made that change 9 months ago, but it's not documented anywhere. What registry keys and what policies and other configuration changes that made that image possible, right? So that image is kind of gold in the sense that it's kind of an unknown. So with all the values in there, it's been tested, it's been gone through UAT, TAT, it's been put into production at some point, and it's tried and true, right? So when you want to rebuild a VDA, if you don't know the initial process of how that current VDA was built, how do you know you're going to get, maybe you get 95% of the way there and somebody's like, oh, well, we upgraded the wrong version of printer logic that doesn't work with Windows 2012 RT.
Mm-hmm.
And, it just happened recently where, we rebuilt the image, but it wasn't 100% because the version that got installed in the new version was different than the one that was in the current production VDAs that they were using. It's so slightly different. Nice thing about this is everything done, not only done what needs to be done, but in a specific order that you want it to be done in as well, which I kind of think is important. We've run into some issues with installing Storefront on Windows 2019 servers, and what a lot of us have found, that's not me because I talked to some other people and they kind of discovered this too, is if you install Storefront first and then Windows updates, everything seems to be fine. It's when you install the Windows 2019, install Windows updates, and then install Storefront, this weird, funky things that don't make any sense seem to happen. Right?
Right.
On the contrary, Microsoft Edge, right? I had some demos set up with Microsoft Edge in it, and it was working great until one day it stopped working. And I was like, why do you keep failing? It's just a Chocolatey install. So I'm using Chocolatey to do the installation through Ansible, and I found out it wanted the Windows updates to be there before this particular version of Windows Edge would install. So it wanted to see a patch system before the installer would install or update Edge.
Right.
So it had the opposite effect, right? And I had been doing the application installation, then Windows updates, and that was causing that to fail.
So in a way, this is a way of capturing and encoding all of those lessons you've learned for next time. When you encounter one of these weird corner cases, you can just make sure in your scripts that, okay, well, this has to be done in this order. And even can you leave comments in these files to,
absolutely.
with the hash symbol, yeah.
I could put in here install Windows updates before installing Edge, Microsoft Edge.
Nice.
And now I can document, right? And it, the more information you give to the next person, obviously the better. So, it's kind of not only self-documenting, but at the same time, it allows you to leave a little bit more information that you normally haven't done in the past. So, this is pretty much done. It's doing the final reboot here. And once that final reboot is done, I'll take you to the second half of that, the demo. I don't know how much time we have left. We're kind of closing in on this.
We've got about 10 minutes, so we better start knocking off some of these general questions.
Okay.
Some of them have been kind of sitting here for 45 minutes or so. So, sort of general questions. Could Ansible and CI/CD be used to create OS images and use these images for MCS?
You can use Ansible for provisioning VM. I personally like Ansible. Not Ansible. Okay, let me rephrase that. You can use Ansible for creating doing all what I'm doing with Packer. I just prefer to use Packer. I think Packer or Terraform I think they have better tools in that regard of just provisioning the OS and getting it initially configured, and then hand it off to Ansible. I don't want to use Packer to do all the provisioning that I'm doing here, right? So every time I want to test something, I got to reinstall the OS and then wait another 10 minutes for that.
So you're kind of really using the best tool for the job here, and combining the tools for what they're best for.
Correct.
So
I think at the end of the day, you're going to use multiple tools, and
right,
it may suck to have to learn multiple tools, but if you learn multiple tools, you're going to get to be able to leverage the best of each tool.
right,
And instead of just trying to fit, everything's a nail, or
yeah.
you have a hammer and everything's a nail at that point.
So
you can see it finished. It finished this up.
Okay.
I did have install Notepad++ in Google through Chocolatey.
Right.
It showed you that, hey, you didn't have Chocolatey installed, so it automatically installed Chocolatey for you.
Cool.
And so it's actually a great way to get that repository or leverage that repository, Chocolatey, for doing the installations of applications like Chrome and Notepad. So if we go we connect to this test server, we log in, kind of show you a quick what this kind of looks like. We can see a Chrome icons already there.
Right.
We have with the CPL, bring up the add remove programs, and we can see we have our PBS target installed. We have session recording agent, the VDA, WEMS installed, Notepad++ installed. But I do have one more piece to this demo I think is kind of cool. Is I'm going to switch over to this PBS server, and I have a device in here, VDA1. I don't have a VDS installed. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually take this test image and create an image using Ansible to pop up. Let's just get that started. We're going to go ahead and take this create PBS image that I created here. And we're going to go ahead and run this. And now it's going to connect to the machine, and it's going to run a script that I created that will actually create a PBS image. And we can kind of see it live. It creates this, what I call an Ansible staging image. So it's gonna upload this image right now. So see, it's about 20 meg. This is the one I did last night. These are some other test ones I did earlier this year. But you can see that it's actually much quicker than using the imaging wizard.
Right.
It's like, I wish I found this tool many years ago, because it creates PBS images all the time, and this is like the fastest way I found to create a PBS image.
So looks like we might get a chance for another question or two while that's ticking up.
Okay.
So benefits of using Ansible over PowerShell DSC.
Well, the dire state's kind of gone away. I don't know. I went down the whole DSC route, that rabbit hole, only to find out, oh yeah, that stuff's getting deprecated and going away. I'm like, what? Why am I spending my time here doing DSC with PowerShell? And I'm like, I gave up on it and started moving towards using Ansible instead. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it'll bring it back, and maybe I'm misinformed on that. But that's kind of, I went down that rabbit hole trying to figure out how can I do a lot of this stuff with DSCs. And when I got PowerShell 7 installed, it's like, where's all the DSC stuff? I'm like, only to find out a lot of it's been removed. Okay, so finish that. The last thing I'm going to do is, this is actually a pretty quick one, and then we got some time for questions. So I'm actually going to assign this image. So I've got the staging one, and so right now we just have these two images in here, one I created last night and one a couple months ago. So this last Ansible script, what it's going to do is going to look for that staging image that that we just uploaded to the PBS server, and it's going to rename it with a time and date format so that the file can be unique, and it's going to assign it to this collection, which includes this VDA. So let me just refresh to show there's nothing assigned to it. And so I'm going to, this only takes a second or two for it to run. And so now if we go back here and we refresh, we can see we have a new text image with the current time, date, and hour, and assigned to the VDA. And if we refresh the store, we can see the disk is refresh. There we go. We can see that we created it. We brought it in as a standard image with 2 gig write cache. And if I come over and we kind of squeak back over to our VMware, I can go ahead and I'm going to power on this VM. And let's go ahead and launch the remote console. Let's do this. Let's, we can see PVS is booting. I was kind of hoping to show you the Pixie boot process, but we can see that it booted up from there. So, we can see that now we used Ansible to run through, create a master VDA image, and then we created a BATX file up on the PVS server, assigned it to a machine, and now we're actually booted the machine using that image that we created.
Right. So this is freshly created just in the last 2 or 3 minutes.
Yep.
Very cool. Very cool.
And we can automate this stuff. So we could have automatically do this nightly if we wanted to, or weekly. Again, things do change, right? The world has changed, especially if you do an evergreen. And one day, this one app doesn't want to install properly, and you have to troubleshoot it because the developers had changed the installation switches or something of the sort, or it came to a new installer.
Right. Yeah, you're getting this predictability. Okay,
so we have our Google.
So some more questions. What are the infrastructure requirements for Ansible? What do people need to get started?
Well, for Ansible, so Ansible is there's a paid product and there's a free product, both from Red Hat. Ansible, for the most, is an open source product platform, right? But with Red Hat, as with anything, the free version, if you want support, you got to pay for support, right? Or you want some of the really fancy features that Red Hat has crafted for the open source platform, then you end up paying for that. So Ansible, the free platform that you can download, it's the only thing to me is it runs on Linux, right? It has a ton of Windows modules and stuff, the open source, community created stuff. Even Ansible team has created a bunch of Windows modules and stuff for it, and they've been really pushing using Ansible for Windows themselves. However, Ansible doesn't run on Windows like Packard does, right? You need a Linux distribution. And in this case, I'm using Ubuntu. Ubuntu's free, it's easy to use, it's easy to install. But once you've downloaded Ubuntu, you could run. There's some scripts out there that say, hey, you need to run these particular scripts to make sure you have Python installed, pips installed, and kind of the other dependencies, all the middleware. Like in Windows world, we call it, .NET framework, and a bunch of C++. Well, the equivalent of those in the Linux world, right? So a lot of the middleware bits and pieces have to be installed, and then you run through the Ansible installer script, and now you can run Ansible. It's all command line based, so there's no GUI to it. Now there's some third-party stuff and some other people who created GUIs. You can use AWS, which is the free version of Ansible Tower, and that's built off of REST API, and it's GUI based. It's a web-based GUI, and you can use that for doing some orchestration and scheduling of the kind of tasks. You can say, hey, every week I want you to run this playbook, or every night I want you to run this playbook, or these sets of playbooks, and I want these playbooks run in this order. Now you could create one big massive playbook, or you can create lots of small ones. I like the smaller ones, but then you can use AWS to chain them, right? That it can it can be used to chain multiple playbooks together.
Right. Okay. So I think the bottom line there is, although you do need Linux to run Ansible, it has lots of tools and modules for operating on those Windows systems. So I think we're at the top of the hour again. So we do have a record of all the questions. So if we didn't get to yours, and we had some great questions there, we will answer those offline and get back to you. So with that, I've got my own little ad to do here, and then we'll go back to Stephanie for the all-important Apple AirPods. So hang on a minute longer for the quiz to win those Citrix branded Apple AirPods. So first thing is, next week, June 9th, so next Wednesday, we have our very first Citrix Developer Forum. So this is like a mini conference and hackathon, all free, all online, running from 1 p.m. Central European time. So anybody's welcome to join this, but it's aimed at our community in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So 3 great sessions there. Patrick van den Born and Rick Steenman are going to kind of continue this DevOps theme, talking about deploying Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session with Azure DevOps, Terraform, and Packer. So we'll see more tools in this infrastructure as code vein. Guy Leach, a name well known in the community, will be talking about PowerShell for the Citrix admin. So if you've been kind of clicking boxes in the config and following runbooks, that might be really interesting to kind of see how you can automate some of those tasks with PowerShell. And then I'll be talking about a new feature that has come to Citrix Workspace micro apps, which is scripting. So we now have the ability to run JavaScript in the micro app service and transform data. So you can do some really cool things like calling XML APIs and doing pretty much arbitrary transformations in the micro app service. Yeah, we'll round that off with a panel discussion, and we'll also have another hackathon. So build those micro apps and win some cool prizes. So there's a short link at the bottom of the screen there, bit.ly CDF EMEA 2021, and you can register. And then one last slide. Stephanie's there with the shepherd's crook to pull us off stage. I'm going to present a webinar same time next month, so the first Tuesday of the month. We're running these webinars with our wonderful friends at CUGC, and I'm going to be talking about the CVAD SDK versus the API, what they do, why there are 2 different tools, when to use them, and really going into that and demystifying some of that programmatic access to CVAD. So with that, Stephanie, tell our lovely viewers how they can win the AirPods.
Well, you have to have been paying attention, right? Now we have a couple of trivia questions. Let me get the slides up there. Let's see, don't see them. Oh, GoToWebinar. Nope. PowerPoint slide. Still doesn't, it's hard to answer the questions when you can't see them. Keep trying to play them. There we go.
Yay.
Can you see that? Yay. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So what I'm going to do is I have 3 trivia questions, and the first person to correctly answer each question will be our winner today. So question number 1. This webinar focused on Ansible. What other infrastructure as code tool was mentioned? Whoa, okay.
So the one we were looking, well, we mentioned a few, so I think we'll take Mehdi's answer of Packer, because that's definitely an infrastructure as code tool. We also mentioned Terraform, which does some of this. These all kind of overlap a little bit and have sweet spots. And we'll definitely talk about Packer next week in Patrick Van Den Born's session. Okay, so well done, Mady.
All right.
Well, yeah, we said Terraform, but Terraform or Packer.
All right, which vendor owns Ansible?
Wow, that was fast.
Whoa, yeah, I know, I can't keep up. Okay, whoa, okay. Yep. Looks like Nathan.
Yep, fast fingers.
Wow. Okay, Nathan Payne. Congratulations.
Despite missing the space out of Red Hat, I think we give that to Nathan.
Oh, hilarious. And finally, what programming language does Ansible use?
Yeah, wow. Okay. So the first person who did not already win something was Jesse Hughes. It's Python. So a lot of people put YAML, which is not a programming language. That's kind of more of a markup language for those declarative files. It doesn't count as a programming language. So
awesome. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for being here today. Thanks, Joe, that was a lot of demo work you had to do, and it all worked, right?
Yeah,
you didn't have to sacrifice a goat.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised. I did one cardinal sin was also I updated those Citrix modules on the Ansible Galaxy for PBS, WEM, and CVAD. I updated those last night yesterday to include the new LTSR 3 version that we use today, the 1912 LTSR 3 update that was just recently released last week, I think it was. And so that's now up on the Ansible Galaxy with those included.
And it still worked. Amazing. All right.
Thank you guys for having me, and thank you, Pat, and thank you, Stephanie.
Yeah. Thank you, Joe. That was fantastic. And I'll be getting in touch with you to write that up as an article. I'll do all the work. I'll just shoot it over to you for review. And thank you so much to Stephanie for hosting us here with CUGC. This is turning out to be a great webinar series, and thank you to everybody who joined us today.
Thanks, everyone. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you at another event soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.